name is Nicola Corti, and I'm here on behalf of Yelp. And today we're going to talk about building UI-consistent Android apps. For the one of you who doesn't know Yelp, Yelp is a tech company based in San Francisco. Our mission is basically to connect people with great local businesses. So you can basically use Yelp to search for restaurants, any kind of business, whatever. We actually have 2 offices in the European area, one in London and one in Hamburg, Germany. That is the office where I'm currently working. And just a few words about me. I'm an Android engineer. I work in the Beats core. That's my email address and my Twitter handle. Feel free to drop me a tweet, or I'm around if you want to chat about whatever. OK, so let's start with what is consistency. I'm going to use a quote here. So consistency is defined as the unified use of design elements, such as color, typography, special layout, and behavior. We can actually define 2 different types of consistency. The first one is the internal consistency, either visual. So for example, here we have 2 buttons. They all express the same concept. There is like, we request the user to perform an action, to press. But the first one has a gradient background, has no animation, while the second one has a ripple animation and a flat background. So they're not consistent each other. Or the functional consistency. So for example, we can define different style of buttons, and we must assure that whenever you use, for example, the positive button, the semantic of this button is the same. So for example, a positive button could mean, OK, confirm the action. We must be sure that whenever we use this button, we allow the user to confirm an action. The other type of consistency is the external consistency, either across product. So here, for example, we can see 2 screenshots from 2 of our products. The one on the left is the consumer application, and the one on the right is the business owner application. And we must be sure that whenever users are using these 2 applications, they feel like if they're in contact with Yelp, with the business. Or across platform consistency. So we have both applications, either for Android and for iOS. And we must be sure to do not break the platform-specific pattern. For instance, I don't know, on iOS, on Android, you have the floating action button on the bottom right. You can't use that on iOS because it's nothing specific of the iOS platform. Why we want to achieve consistency? Because we can gather some benefits. First of all, we will improve learnability. The app will be easier to use for the user. We will reduce the frustration, so the user will not get crazy trying to understand where to perform actions. And at the same time, if we manage to build a repository with all of our components, we can basically save money and time. So we don't need to code every time, every component. We can just reuse them. So, OK, I hope I convinced you that consistency can be a good thing. How to tackle consistency? So let's say that I have my code base with a bunch of layouts, and I want to like refactor a little. So I will start with just like, yeah, refactoring. So this is like the shortcut for Android Studio to find and replace. But the problem is that if I don't have a huge set of tests, that's what could happen. I can like, you know, start fine and then that's it. The problem is that you can't just start refactoring all your code base and searching for all the buttons and try to replace whatever, because in 1 month you will end up having other consistency problems. So the first thing that you gotta do is define a style guide. Okay? So what is a style guide? A style guide is a set of things that could be either design principles, metrics, colors, icons that you use to design your products. What can go inside a style guide? As I said, you can put guidelines for the icons, your color palette. You can put voice and tone. So for example, whenever I refer to my business user, I want to use these terms. I want to call a business always business. I don't want to call it firma or using other terms. This is really important and quite hard also to do, but it gives you a lot of value. If you never wrote a style guide before in your life, the better things to do to start with is check out external examples. There are a bunch of them. The first one is obviously the Google Material Design. This is basically a style guide you can take as a starting point, or use the Apple design guidelines that are really, really well done as well. And one of my favorite is actually GitHub Primer. This is the web toolkit they use for building all the GitHub UI, and is mostly web-oriented, but at the same time is really well done. And if you're looking for more ideas, you can have a look at StyleGuide.io. It's basically a repository of a bunch of style guide and design systems that you can have a look and get some ideas. Or last suggestions, this repository, awesome design system. It's basically a markdown file with a bunch of design system that you can take as example, and they're also you can see if every design system, if they provide like voice and tone specification, if they provide designer kit, so actually real code that you can use, and it's pretty useful. So take them as an example. But how we did that? So how we tackled consistency internally into our company. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to focus my discussion on just 2 Android apps, although we have nearly 7, I guess. So we're going to focus on these 2, the consumer application and the business owner application for either Android or iOS. And I'm going to give you some examples of consistency problems, of use cases. The first one is across product. And the use case that I'm going to show now is the native business claim flow. So for the claim flow is what allows a business owner to claim a business. So let's say that I'm the owner of Pizzeria Romana over there, and I want to claim this business to be able to change my information, whatever. So I open the consumer app, I scroll to the bottom, and I see this banner that says, hey, this is your business, let's claim this. Okay, I click over there, I provide my details, like my email address. Okay, claim is successful, open the app, and then I jump there. So the first 4 screenshots are from the consumer app, and the last one is from the biz owner app. What I want to be sure is that whenever the user jumps from here to there, he's still in touch with Yelp. He really feels that he's still working with our products. It doesn't, I mean, I don't want him to get confused by this jump. That's why I want to enforce consistency over here. And another example is the cross-platform consistency. So beginning of this year, we developed a feature called the business switcher. So let's say that I'm the owner of Starbucks in Berlin, and I have like, I don't know, 20 shops. And I want to be able to easily change between my shops to answer to messages that comes from different customers to different shops. So on Android, we try to follow the specific pattern, and we added that icon on the top right of the navigation drawer. There is something similar that happens in the Gmail app. You have all the account over there. But you can't do that on iOS because you don't have a navigation drawer. So we use slightly more iOS-specific pattern. That is adding the icon on the top right and a menu coming from the right. So this is an example of a cross-platform consistency. We want to build the same feature, but at the same time do not destroy the pattern specific of every platform. So we ended up building our style guide. It's publicly available on yelp.com/styleguide. You can actually have a look at that. We have there all of our web components and mobile style guides. We also published our official color palette. So for every color, we decided to provide specification to developers if every color could be used either on mobile, on web, as a background, or as a typography color. This comes from an evolution of our palette, because at the beginning we ended up having a bunch of colors for every crazy use case, and we decided to reduce as much as possible the number of colors, and also to restrict the usage of some of them. So for example, the green, an Android developer is allowed to use only the green regular and the green extra light. That's all. And we will see how later how we can enforce these on the Android code base. And also we provided specification for our illustration. So for example, we want to enforce that our graphics is always inside a circular frame and not inside a square frame. Or we want to, I don't know, enforce that the trait is always 2 pixels and is always black, because we don't want to use white traits for the border. Okay, this is nice, but that's all like designer work. Designers can create these and decide which trait is better, which frame is better for us. By the end of the story, you end up having a super nice style guide, and you need to code that. At a certain point, you must be sure that all these principles becomes Android code. And that's the trickiest part. So I'm going to introduce this using a simple component, and we're going to go through the life cycle of a component with 3 steps. The first one is the design step. The second one is the build step, and the last one is the share step. So let's start from the first one, design. So when I talk about design here, I'm not talking about the graphical design of the component, but I'm talking about the API of the component. Because the graphical design, I already have it. A designer already put the component inside a style guide. So what I need to do now is to code that, and I have to be sure that the other, I don't know, 50 Android developers at Yelp in San Francisco, they're able to use the component well, okay? So I have to define an API. The first questions that I ask myself whenever I want to create a component is, does it fit? Having components in this shared library is a huge effort, because I have to maintain them for a lot of time, for several years, whatever. So, first of all, I need to be sure that this component can be reused. I don't want to have their components that are useful just for one screen that is hidden in the application. I want to have their components that are used in a bunch of different screens. So all the components that are used just once are probably dropped. That doesn't make sense to have them inside this repository. Then, is it visible to the user? We restrict the components inside the Android style guide library to be only UI components. We don't want any kind of background manager, handler, whatever. We just want things that the user can see. That's really important. And then also, what's the development plan? What are we going to do with this component? Are we going to update that? Are we going to add other feature in the future? So we need to, those components, they have a life. They can't just stay there and leave it there forever. We want to be sure that whenever we spend some effort in creating one of them, we will reuse them, and they will grow during the time. So I'm going to use this one. This is a user passport component. We use that whenever we want to select the list of your friends or the list of users that like the business. And it's made of different little widgets. So the user photo, a timestamp that can be used whenever we show the like of a business when every user liked the business. Then the username. Then counters for friends, media, and check-ins. Then a badge if the user is part of our elite program. And then a description. So, for example, in my case, I can have like my picture, Nicola Corti, owner of Pizzeria Romana, as a description. So let's deep dive into the code and see how we can actually code this component. So first of all, we gotta define some attributes. We create an XML file, and we create an entity, a declare stylable for this user passport. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna focus only on the name and the description. The other attributes will be kind of similar. So I create a new attribute called user passport name as a string, and another called user passport description as a string. Please know the 2 comments that they say what these attributes will be used for, because I will reuse them later. And then I need to find another attribute that's the user passport style, and this attribute will be used for the default style of this component inside our theme. So let's talk about the theme. We defined a unique theme for all of our Android applications called Yelp Style Guide Theme. So all the applications will inherit from this theme, and we define this as a sub-theme of one of the Android support library theme. So we don't want to override all the properties. We want to, I don't know, use the default text view and then use our own business user passport. And then what we do? We set as a default the user passport style attribute to a style user passport. This is going to be the default user passport style. Why I'm saying this? Because we enforce that every widget that we put inside the library has a default style. Why? Because whenever a developer in San Francisco wants to drag and drop the component inside the Android Studio Designer, he should be able to see something. Those components should be easy to use. I don't want other developers to get headache because they need to understand how to use every attribute. That's crazy. Those components should work out of the box. They should have sample values that then the developer can override. But I don't want other developers to get crazy to understand how to use them. So let's see this style, how it's defined. So we have a style called user passport, and then we set the default value for the attributes. So for example, for the name, we set the default value as Joe's Meat, and for the description, owner of sample business. Okay. So this is all the XML work. Let's see how we need to code that. So we will create a class in Java. So sorry guys, this is Java, not yet Kotlin. We are using Kotlin, but we haven't changed the style guide library yet. So I'm gonna use Java for the people who doesn't know Kotlin yet, but you should learn it. So we first define the two text views. One for the username and the other for the description. We are gonna inherit, we're gonna extend a relative layout because we define our component as a relative layout. And we enforce getters and setters for every attribute. So every attribute that you defined previously as in the XML file has to have a setter. So in this case, I will have a set name that will just set the name, and then I will have a set description. And in this setter, I can have all my crazy logic to handle widget visualization or measuring, whatever. Why we want to enforce this, we will see it in a few minutes. So we will define our 3 or 4 constructor for a custom view on Android. And we require to use a common method for all of them, like the init method. This init method will take, the classical parameter. So what we do here, we just inflate the XML layout of the user passport. We retrieve the 2 views, so the name and the description. We take the attributes from the XML file, and then here we set the name and the description using the setter and the getter. Using the setter of the 2. Why we want to enforce this, as I said before, because all the logic of visualization of widgets should be inside a setter. So we don't want logic inside the constructors, basically. And also, we want to enforce that every attribute could be set either from the XML or from the Java code. So if I have an attribute called description, I want to be sure that the developer can type .set description, and it should be able to call a method. That's a requirement of the API of the component. And then obviously you don't have to forget to recycle the styles. So this is how will look like the user passport style, default style at the end of the story. Those are like most of our attributes. What you can do then, if for instance in our case, in our application we have 2 themes, the default theme and the dark theme. The dark theme is used, for example, whenever we want to show media to the user, whenever we want to show the menu pictures or the pictures of the food. So we define a white style for the user passport. We override the attributes that would make sense to override. So for example, we will override the media counter, and we don't want them to be orange, but we want them to be white. And we can just remove all the previous attributes because they will be inherited with this .white notation. So that's how we basically design the API of our components. Then, whenever you do this, you maybe want to think about also colors. So for the colors, we built a system called Yelp Design. Yelp Design is an automated system where every designer can put a token. A token is a piece of information that is meaningful for designers. So it can be either like a color or a metric. They put this value inside this repository, and our CI system will make sure that those values, those tokens, are built for every platform. So for instance, on Android, I will end up having a colors.xml file with all the colors and a demons.xml file with all the dimensions. And the same happens for web and the iOS development. A similar system is developed for the icons. It's called Yelp Icons. And it works in a similar way. So it basically allows designers to provide SVG files. And the CI system will make sure to build those SVG files and create assets for every platform. So at the end of the story, we just define those two systems as Gradle dependencies. They're published inside our own Maven private repository. So we just bump the version whenever a designer provides a new asset. And you will end up having them inside your Android Studio project Explorer. So talking about the colors, as I said before, we wanted to restrict as much as we can the color palette. So this is our actual color palette. This is how we do from the style guide, from the designer point of view, to the developer point of view. To enforce the usage of only these kind of colors, we decided to use postfix for the name. So whatever has interface, so like black extra light interface, is a color that is good to use because it comes from the palette. And as I said before, so for instance, for the green, inside my palette, I will have only green regular and green extra light. I don't have access to the other color. If I want to use the other color, I should like type it inside my files, and this is like, not nice. So this will prevent colors going back and forth, slack, and getting lost. And I think it's like really, really useful to enforce usage of a small palette. So that's all about design. Let's talk about the build. So how I want to be sure that my component works well with our build infrastructure. First of all, we're using Review Board for posting reviews. It's something similar to GitHub. And we have template for our new reviews on the Android style guide library. And we require developers to answer some questions. If you're using GitHub, you can create a pull request template, and you get the same result. Basically, we ask, hey, are you adding a new module? If yes, have you provided a screenshot? Or, hey, you're modifying a module. You know that if you modify something, you can break the other apps. Maybe the button will not react anymore to clicks. And this will break all of our features. So have you tested that? So this is like just a simple step. It doesn't enforce anything, but it just asks developer if you did the work properly. Talking about the code, we organized our library as a Git submodule, and we require to run several CI jobs. So first of all, a CI job, we use Jenkins actually for this. A CI job for the module, so your code must compile. If it doesn't compile, you can't commit. This is obvious. But at the same time, you must run a CI job on the consumer app and on the business app. Why this? Because we want at least to be sure that if you commit tomorrow, the developer in London or whatever, he does a Git pull, and we want to be sure that at least the other project, they will build. We don't want to break other project because we committed in a shared repository. To enforce the usage of the style guide library, we also provide a tool. There is custom lint checks. So how they work? Basically, we created some custom static analysis tools to be sure that whenever a developer on Android instantiate Android stock button, it will raise a warning. Like, hey, you are creating a button. You know that you should use our Yelp buttons? These at the same time can work for several classes, or can work also for method invocations. So for instance, we have our own Yelp snack bar that allows us to put more things inside the snack bar, and we check for snackbar.make calls. If you do that, we will raise a warning like, hey, you shouldn't. We have our class. Please use that. Obviously, we don't want to like block the users on these. So as every link checks, you can easily suppress them, providing the ID of the issue that you want to suppress. So Keynote crashed. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Apple. We're going to reopen. It happened also to Jack Wharton, so I'm happy of this. But and there is a memory leak in the animations. Yeah, OK. I was here. OK. So you can provide the ID of the issue that you want to suppress. But at the same time, you can also provide, we ask you to provide a comment of why you are suppressing the lint on that specific instance. So for instance, I'm using a stock button because I want this feature and I don't have yet. So maybe put there also a ticket of the issue. Those lint checks works also for XML code. And this is where we actually have most of our issues. So you can like create issues that checks if you're instantiating a button element inside the XML and raise an issue. And again, you can easily suppress them using the tools ignore element on every issue. So how we set it up our lint infrastructure, we have a build.gradle file. Inside the build.gradle, you can provide a lint options block. And first of all, we do not believe that warnings are useful for developers because most of the time they're ignored. So we set all warnings as error, and we abort the build on errors. Okay? So this means that if you start using a stock button, and you're not using our custom button, your build will break. Okay? That's nice, but at the same time, you maybe want to create a custom lint check, and you don't want to break the build for everyone because you're using an old button because you introduced the button just yesterday. So you will have like thousands of them. So how you can do to avoid this problem? First of all, you can provide a lint config file and suppress lint warnings on specific packages. So let's say on the user onboarding flows, I don't want to raise this issue because we have a bunch of buttons over there, and I'm going to take care of that in the future. Or even better, you can set a baseline file. A baseline file is like a snapshot of your issues. So you take like a photography of what's the current status of the code base, and you will say to lint, hey, those issues, you can ignore them. But every new issues, you have to raise them. Okay? So I can provide a baseline for today and create a new lint check from tomorrow morning. If a developer starts using a new Android button, it will get blocked. But if all the previous button, they will not raise any exceptions, and they will not block the builds. So this is really useful. Then we require you to test your components. First of all, we use Espresso for our UI testing. So your component must work with Espresso. This is really important because we want to be able to test our screens. And if you create a component that is not testable, that's not going to go anywhere. If you have state changes, like if you have a toggle button, it probably makes sense for you to write some JUnit test for that. And also, we require to set the content description. This is really important, and it will eventually need to have just a talk for this point. That is the accessibility issue problem. But at least we want to be sure that screen readers works fine with our application. So every component must provide a content description. OK, so it's fine. Now it's time to share your component with the rest of the other developers at Yelp. So first of all, to be sure that your component is fine, we require you to provide documentation. So you must provide Java doc, you must add screenshots, you must document every attribute and every style, as I showed before. So every attribute and every style in the XML has to have an XML comment on top that says this is the style that is supposed to be used for the dark theme. And this attribute is controlling the description and is showing these numbers or whatever. This is really important because a lot of other developers will use that component, and we want to reduce headache as much as possible. Then screenshots capture. Since this is a design library and there is a lot of UI, we want to be sure that developers and designers can easily have a feedback of what's going on at the components. So at the beginning, our screenshots capture was just manual screenshots. The developers will take screenshots of the component, and that's it. Then we automated locally the screenshots capture. So we have a script that runs an emulator locally and takes screenshots and put them in the repository. And the last version of our screenshots capture is automated in the CI. So we basically use Espresso test to take screenshots and to put them automatically inside the repository. At the end of the story, you will end up having something like this. This is basically Javadoc on steroid. We just changed the CSS file, and you will have the comments on top of the Java file. Then all the screenshots you want to provide, and attributes and styles that are documented. So we get them from the XML code, and we put it there. So you already know what's going on if you change them. Last thing that we provide is the StyleguideTestApp. It's basically a component showcase application where you can see all the components, and it's useful for designer and for developers. For designers, because they can easily see how those components react, so they can test them and see all the animations. And for developers, because they can easily see how to use new components. And this is we require every components to be even interactive. So, for example, the next one is the Yelp tooltip. And you see the designer can easily change the attributes with this UI and see how the tooltip will look like. Let's see how we take screenshots with Espresso. So we basically have a new view action called screenshot. So as you have on view with ID, you already click. Now you can do on view with ID, my button, screenshot. Provide two parameters, folder name and file name, and it will take a screenshot. And this is the perform action. So we have our screenshot URL that will take the view hierarchy and take a bitmap of your view. So this is how a sample Espresso test for taking screenshot will look like. We will use the stars view. So normally we will do, as I said, on view with ID of the view, perform set stars number to 4, or you can do set stars number to 5 and take a screenshot called stars with text, whatever. And then we also have, inside the URL, a method to take the screenshots of the old screen. This is not actually used so much, but it can be helpful if you want to take screenshots with your Espresso tests. So to wrap up, what's the point? I talk a lot about consistency, but I think that the point is bend it, don't break it. The style guide library is not a cage. You should use it to get a better product, but it shouldn't block and it shouldn't slow down your development so much. So it's up to you to decide how strict you want to be with your code base and with other developers. So that's all for me today. Quick thing, we are hiring. I also have a colleague of mine from San Francisco here, Tomer. So you can ask to me if you're interested in position in Europe. You can ask to him if you're interested in position in San Francisco. We have a bunch of gadgets here for you. And that's all. I'm up for any kind of questions. Domande. But I think I need...
Oh, yeah. You hear me?
No, però posso venire lì.
Yeah,
Ah, no,
I was
arrivano.
just wondering.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you develop widgets, what is the the division between widgets that should handle their own style and widgets that should defer, that should don't handle any style, because of course stateless widgets are better, right? But sometimes, for example, the toggle button, you have to handle state, right? What is the big division? What is the main factor that tells you, okay, this component should not have state, this one should?
Okay, so usually, as you said, we try to avoid having stateful components. We try to have just like buttons and whatever that doesn't have state, because we also, as I said, you have to write your unit test for your own state transitions. But at the same time, that comes from a designer. I mean, it's a designer that says like, oh, we want like the useful button here, and whenever you click them, the useful should stay there and be highlighted. Okay, so there's nothing that comes from the developer. It's the designer that says there will be a state there. So this comes directly from the designer. I don't know if I have answered your question. Yeah. I guess that's all. Thank you for coming.